hope you're doing well. My name is Anahita Sen, and I'm a co-facilitator of the M&A Stories YouTube podcast, which is brought to you by Fifth Grown Business Insights. Welcome to Season 3. The theme of this season is culture and its impact on M&A integration. Culture is one of the biggest challenges that face an M&A integration, and this challenge couldn't get any bigger as more companies are pursuing M&A based on people and culture. That is why it is important to understand, internalize, respect, and develop a clear plan of action on how to handle culture in M&A. In this season, we will be interviewing industry leaders from across the globe to hear their stories on how they address culture in an M&A integration. So here we go with today's episode.
Hi there, welcome to another episode of M&A Stories. As you know, the theme of the season is culture, how culture impacts M&A. Today's guest is somebody who spent years as business leader, and we would like to hear about his perspective on how culture impacts M&A. So ladies and gentlemen, it gives me a pleasure to welcome Giovanni Amodeo. Hey Giovanni, it's good to see you. How have you been?
Very well, thank you, Anirvan. Great to have me here. Thank you.
Brilliant. For our viewers and listeners, why don't we start with a brief introduction?
Okay, my name is Giovanni Amodeo, and I'm the Chief Data Officer for Ion Analytics. Ion Analytics is a company part of Ion Group, and we provide data, news, and analytics for our clients, which are the market participants in the capital market space. I've been in the company for over 20 years, and I've done different roles. So I started as an analyst, then my dream was to become a journalist, and I became one. And I then progressed, and I was in Italy, I was in Germany, and then I managed a global editorial team. And then at some point I realized that data was driving businesses. And then I moved back onto data, which is where I started. And now I'm the Chief Data Officer for Analytics.
Awesome. You've been involved in the business side of things for many years, and that includes some M&A activities as well. And as you know, the theme for this season is culture. So maybe let's start with a bit of your experience around culture to get the conversation going.
Absolutely. So just to give the audience the background, we were bought by Ion in 2019. And before that, the company was owned by BC Partner, which is a financial investor. Before that, we were owned by Pearson, which at the time was the owner of Financial Times. The company was started in 1999 with a couple of venture capitalists. So we've seen, on one hand, those acquiring us, and then later down the line, we saw and we had experience about acquisition, and we did several ones between 2012, 2013, and when Ion bought us, which is the experience I'd like to share today.
Brilliant, brilliant. Why is culture such a big topic in your opinion?
Culture is the most important factor in any M&A transaction, like in any company, even if you're not doing M&A. How do you engage with your employees? How do you keep them motivated? And this is worked organically, but also through acquisition. So the first factor to take into consideration when you acquire, or when a company acquires another company, is, are the interests aligned? First of all, so that's the first consideration that you have to make. So let's say, for example, you acquire a company and you keep the owner still in the business. So are they financially incentivized as much as you are financially incentivized? So that's the first question that needs to be answered. So for example, are the owners given an earnout? And how is the earnout being based on? Is based on revenue targets or is based on EBITDA targets? So let's assume the owners are linked to an earnout which is based on revenues. But you, as a parent company, then you're incentivized in growing your EBITDA. So right there, you have a disconnect. So culture is super important because, okay, maybe that agreement was inevitable, but you need to find a way on one, not to get too frustrated with the entrepreneur that sold the business because they are preferring revenues over EBITDA. So that's the first thing that needs to be overcome. And going to more into specific, culture is the most important factor, because if you have alignment with culture, then you go to the same direction. And whenever you ask someone that was acquired to do something for you, they understand where you're coming from. And I can give later on more specific examples.
Awesome. And I think you've highlighted that culture is not just culture, but there are underlying factors, and started with a great example. When did you start your learning journey in culture?
Okay, so let's maybe give an example of concrete M&A so that the audience can understand a bit better.
Sure.
There are different options here. So on one side, you have an M&A where there is a lot of confidentiality involved. So therefore, your interaction with the target company is very limited, and is limited only to the top people.
Correct.
You understand how the top people think. You might have met them a couple of times, but then you don't know the people below. So then the culture there is an unknown. So then you have an example of you are already cooperating with a company for 1,000 reasons. It could be like you have a partnership, or you've known them for a long time. And that stage, you know the owners a little bit better. And then you have a situation where that company has been working for you for a long time, and you bring them in. So these are, I guess, the three main examples. There could be others, but these are the three main examples. So it's for me, I was involved not as a main guy, because the CEO was the one running the acquisition, but as a head of editorial and expert in data, I was involved in some due diligence. And the due diligence entailed analyzing the database of the acquired companies or the editorial content of the acquired companies. And when we were doing the acquisition, I was able to meet the management team, so the owners of the business, but also one or two levels below. So we, or at that time, Acuris, the company that was bought by Ion, was providing and still provides information and data to the clients, which are banks, private equity, so investors, lawyers, and corporate, and so on. So this company that we looked at was doing something similar in a slightly different way. So why we were providing news which were coming from investigative journalism, so we were trying to discover the news behind what was happening. This other company was doing the similar job, but in a different way. So they were trying not to upset their sources they were speaking to. So you come from a background where your team is aggressive, and then you acquire then a company which does exactly the same thing with a different proposition. So how do you marry the two cultures? You can't go there and say, okay, from now on, you're going to start doing whatever we've been doing for the last 10, 15, 20 years. But you need to understand, okay, what is your relationship with the sources that are giving you the information? And how often do you interact with them? And what is their expectation when they're giving you the information? And I'm sure you can get better information, and you're already getting a lot more of information that you are the one you're publishing or releasing. What is the best way for you to then release that information before, to avoid upsetting the people that we're speaking to? So that was one concrete example of how you try not to force your culture onto the other ones, but try to create some empathy between us and the company we acquired. I've been an observer of M&A transaction on the other side when I was a journalist or an editor, noticing that a lot of the transactions were failing or were not going ahead of plan. And I didn't understand why. I thought that perhaps was because the company that acquired made the wrong decision, or they were too in a hurry. But then when we started making the first acquisition and I started engaging with the target company, then I realized that it clicked straight away. Okay, so culture is the most important factor that needs to be taken into consideration, because you might have the perfect acquisition. Let's say, for example, a company needs some customer base, and then acquiring a target enables them to reach the customer base. You can have that perfect scenario, which is like on a book, but then when you go and talk to the owners and then you don't see eye to eye, then the acquisition might fail. So when we did our first acquisition in 2012 of a company which was doing similar stuff to us, talking to the owners and understanding their position in the market, how they were talking to their sources, their market, the clients, the investor, made me understand that first of all comes the empathy and trying to bring the cultures together. Then everything else comes after.
Gotcha. What are some of the challenges organizations face today when it comes to managing culture in M&A?
Oh, the first challenge is that time. So you are pressed with time, you're pressed with confidentiality. So you approach an M&A deal and you want to do as soon as possible to avoid leakages, especially on the listed front. So that's the first challenge. The second challenge is not posing yourself too clearly with the target when you're trying to acquire them. So you come in as the conqueror, if you like, whereby M&A should be seen as a collaboration. Company A buys company B because they believe that as a result of the combination, both entities will benefit. So that's the initial message of why an M&A is going to create value, is the first thing that companies need to take into consideration. And sometimes companies are driven by the ego of the entrepreneur or the CEO that wants to leave a legacy and say, okay, I've done X many deals in this period of time, or I grew the company from A to B. But then have they really created value, or have they destroyed value? And have they made 7 acquisitions, but then if the integration takes years and years and years and the synergies are not realized, was that a successful acquisition? That's one thought.
Right. No, absolutely. And this is where a lot of organizations still continue to struggle. We'll obviously be talking about some of the reasons why the culture element was not addressed as adequately as it should have been. Do you remember some of the positive stories that kind of swung the integration in a more favorable position because of culture?
Absolutely. So we had instances with 2 of the companies that we bought at the beginning when I was being involved in doing M&A, is that especially if the company that is being bought is much smaller, then you go and talk to the people that are working in the target company and say, okay, as a combination of the 2, we can gain your expertise on one side, but what you can get from us is the exposure to a wider range of clients. Okay, so then so you need to understand internal problems and external problems in everything. So the external problem is that, let's say, for example, a head of data for a particular company that we acquired wanted to get their data across 2 more customers as possible. So this is the external problem. So the internal problem is that they might not feel that they have the capability to do so because they work for a smaller company. So then now, when you then join forces to a larger company, you realize straight away that you have at your disposal many more tools to do the things that you always wanted to do, which is the example on my end when we were bought by Ion, because Ion coming in as a larger player in the market with lots of expertise, we were able to see, okay, now we are ready for the next journey with someone who understands databases more, and then we can do more things than we were doing before.
Right. You've been also exposed to different practitioners with their own stories, and again, due to confidentiality, without naming names of companies. What are some of the main challenges that other organizations face in regards to culture?
The main challenge is not talking straight enough from the beginning. So you're assuming that since you are the acquirer, then you can go in and dictate your own rules. So it's like in any relationship, personal relationship, you need to create that empathy, and that empathy is not necessarily created straight away. Coming to the question about the professional or the participants that help during this transition. So what is the motive that each of them has? So let's say, for example, you are someone doing commercial due diligence, you are tasked to produce a document to assess how the market for that industry is going, who are the main players, and so on. So you are tasked with a specific task. The same is the lawyer, to structure the deal in the best way. The same is the financial advisor, but none of them has the bigger picture, apart from the CEO, who is in a rush to make that acquisition to please the shareholders. So the ideal scenario would be to involve an extra number of people. It doesn't have to be too many, but number enough so that they can start working with the target company in understanding the culture, because the earlier you understand, the better or the more successful you're likely to be. And it is like in any relationship with a person. So imagine you are friends with someone for a long time, and then you fall out, and then you don't talk for a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months, a year. Then to re-engage again, then it's difficult. The same is worth with acquisition. You need to have touch points regularly, every day, every week, and so on. So at least you understand the frustration and be honest as transparent as possible.
Right. I think that's a great call out. Especially, I liked the example where you talked about individual functional leads have their own objectives on what they need to achieve as part of the M&A integration, but they're not necessarily converged, and they're not necessarily aligned. While the bigger picture is still integration, but at a functional level, at a more tactical level, they may not be aligned. I think that's a great call out.
And then also, if I can add, Anirvan, people talk a lot about synergies.
Right.
But synergies is something intangible.
Yes.
So the CEO wants to achieve synergies because then they can show to their shareholders, okay, as a consequence of this acquisition, we achieved 20 million euros in synergies. Great. But for someone a little bit below them, what does synergy mean?
Right.
It's a vague concept, which needs to be explained a little bit better.
Right.
So if you explain what synergy means to the people below, and even after the acquisition is made and is announced, so everyone knows about it, people need to understand, okay, we are working towards integrating the target company into the parent company. And if we do well enough, we can achieve 20 million synergies, but that's not, the financial element is not the most important thing. So think about if we were to integrate well, what are the opportunities that we can gain by integrating the target company properly? And I don't think this is explained in the right way.
Right. What would you say are some of the biggest benefits of addressing culture in a structured way?
The biggest benefit is to, one, create alignment, and we talked about it earlier on. And the second is to avoid people to hide and say, oh, but you didn't tell me, or I didn't know how to do it. Because if you have touch point regularly and you create a culture where, I always remember one mentor telling me, there is never failure but feedback. So if companies are open to feedback, they might be transparent and say, okay, this month we didn't meet the target. That's fine. Okay. So how can we change that? What is the best way for us to course correct? So if you create a culture where people feel like psychologically safety, feel safe enough to say, okay, I put my hand up and we didn't do well enough this month, then all the problems can be resolved earlier on.
I love that example. For companies that want to include culture in their M&A journey, what would be a good starting point?
One exercise that we are doing right now, Ion, is to try and understand people's aspiration. So by aspiration, we don't just mean, okay, I am a managing director of a company or I'm an owner of a company and my aspiration is to take the company public. That could be one short-term aspiration, but there could be many others. What is the personal aspiration? So you can say, okay, I'm the owner of this company. I want to grow the company to X amount of revenues. And then my dream is to then focus on charity or open another company somewhere else. So what can we do to help you achieve your aspiration? So if you apply that when you do M&A to the people that you are talking to, understanding everyone's, so the senior people's aspiration to start with is crucial, because then you go on the same level as them. You're not just imposing yourself, but you're trying to understand. It's like when you have children, you want to understand what is driving them to do certain action. The same is with the entrepreneur of the target company.
What are the different stages of M&A where what specific cultural interventions would you put in?
So as soon as, let's say, there was very little interaction at the beginning. So the exposure from senior management on one side to the senior management on the other side was limited. Then as soon as the deal is announced, then you need to engage and do a town hall. So then the target company knows exactly what is the vision of the acquirer, what are their values, what they're trying to achieve, and as a combination, how does the target company fits into the parent company. So that's one tactic. The second tactic is having very, very senior presence, visiting the sites constantly at the very beginning. So let's say, for example, the target company has different plans, making sure that the senior executive team visits the plants or the offices of the target company on a regular basis for the first 12 months. It's very important because people sometimes, especially those who works in satellite offices, feel neglected. And having someone who makes the effort to travel 10 hours on the plane for 2 days is massively important. And then another tactic is to communicate on a regular level. So doing, for example, all hands, in which the CEO gives an update every month or 3 months. That's also very, very important. And then making sure that people are treated as not as second-class citizens, but as part of the parent company as well. Because the worst thing that can happen, you can say, "Oh, I'm company B, they company A." So the word "they" should be not used. And if the parent company finds out that that's the language that is still being used, that's something that needs to be addressed. So there is no they, there is us. And this is very, very important. Otherwise, you keep the same processes and nothing is going to change. And we have examples of 2 large German banks that merged with each other many, many years ago. And the ones of the target company, they say, "Oh, they, I'm not them, it's they." And lots of people left as a consequence of that.
Yeah. This us and them is such a big thing when it comes to cultural integration. Now, in your journey, you must have come across some good instances where you were really happy that you did something. At the same time, you would have come across some nasty ones where you would probably want to forget about them. Would you be able to share some of those anecdotal examples from your own experience?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the nice ones is when we acquired this company, which was a spin-off of a large listed company. And they welcomed us because they felt that they were neglected. They were one of the many parts of that listed companies. And they knew that they had lots of projects, but they were frustrated because they didn't get that much attention from the parent company. So joining forces with us was a pleasant experience because they knew they had an audience. So that was a good starting point. And understanding that dynamic is very, very important. What drives the target company when they get acquired, and how can they be working better with the acquirer? So understanding that dynamic is very, very important. The opposite is when you have a privately owned company where the founders they were the leader in that particular market. They realized that to be able to grow, they had to sell, or maybe they were greedy to sell and get the money and cash the money, but they didn't really want to sell with their head. So financially, they were happy to sell because they pocket quite a bit of money, but then mentally they weren't. So then it goes back to the financial alignment. Is the financial alignment clarified straight away at the beginning of the acquisition? Because if that is not, and in that case wasn't, because if that it would have been, then it would have been much easier to work with this company.
Great. What are some of the tools, methodologies, or principles that people should use when it comes to cultural integration? Do you have some best practices that you may want to share with our audience?
Companies need to create a playbook that works for them. And the playbooks, it takes time. So the playbooks can say, okay, once we approach the target company, these are the things that we need to do. This is the touch point that we have to do, and this is the frequency. This is how we engage with the owners of the company. So I think following that and doing a pre-mortem and post-mortem is very, very important. Post-mortem, because you can go retrospectively and say, okay, these are the things that didn't work out. Let's readjust the playbook, and next time we're going to course correct. Pre-mortem is not done enough, but is a creative way to think, okay, let's start from now, and in a years from now, what are the things that can happen if we were to do this, and start imagining. And this is going to give you the opportunity to think loudly and say, actually, hang on a minute, if we were to do this, the integration is not going to go as well as we think. So let's rethink. So it's a two-way, pre-mortem and post-mortem.
Wonderful. Can you share a couple of business books that are your favorite with our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have them here on my desk because I refer to them all the time. There is this book called Backable by Sunil Gupta. And it helped me a lot because now in my new role, I am doing something slightly different. The book talks about how to go to a VC firm and try to raise money for your venture. So now this book opened my mind because every time I do something, I approach someone that I'm trying to engage to, or emailing someone, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going in front of a VC that is going to give me the money. How can they think that Giovanni is a backable person? So that was an extraordinary book. So another one that I also here recommend is called Building a Story Brand.
Oh, yes.
By Donald Miller. I don't know if you in the
yes, brilliant book.
You talked about it, but then the customer is a hero is something that is eye-opening. So you're not the hero, the customer is a hero, first of all. And then the 7 steps. So you have a customer, which is a character of your stories, and every book and every movie follow the same pattern. Then this customer has a problem, and then he meets a guide, and the guys give them a plan, and then there is that triggers a call to action, which results in a success and avoids them failure. So now, if you think about it, whatever you do, you should follow those 7 steps. So I definitely recommend. And then another one I also recommend is good leaders ask great questions. So you as a leader, you need to be able to ask the right question at any given time and taking responsibility, which is important because then you can differentiate between a leader and then a manager.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the Ronald Miller's book, especially about the heroes, because literally in the past, customers were looked as customers, but making them as part of your story, making them central to your story, the hero of your story, completely changes the way we look at customers. And we have seen the evolution where we've started now doing a lot more customer profiling. We talk about their gains and their pains, and taking and making customers the hero of your story takes it to the next level, and brilliant sort of narrative in that book. We've seen that in Star Wars, stories, but it's been there historically as well. Now, a question from your own life: is there something that you could share, whether it's a personal hobby or something that not a lot of people know about you? This would make our audience interested in knowing the person, Giovanni Amodeo, rather than the professional. So any personal hobbies or interests that you can share here?
I'm a massive music fan, and I go to a lot of concerts. So as soon as there is something big or even small, I try to attend. For example, in a couple of days, I'm going to see Dream Theater. Is an American rock progressive band. Then I am going to see Iron Maiden, Depeche Mode. So from different genres as well, from progressive, from heavy metal, from jazz, from blues. And I used to organize blues concerts in Italy, in my hometown, for 3 consecutive years.
Wow. That's the side that I'd not known about you, Giovanni, but good to know.
And I cannot play any instruments, by the way. But I've got 2 children, one 7 and one 10. The 7 years old plays the drums, and the 10 years old plays the flute.
Brilliant. Giovanni, you and I, we could probably spend hours talking about this topic. Before we end, I wanted to ask you one last question. Imagine yourself, let's say, 10 years back or 15 years back, whenever you started your M&A career. If you have to give an advice to that self of yours, what would that advice be?
Read more books. Because I was reading a lot of books which was not relevant to business. I was reading literature or investigative journalism, which were very, very nice, and I learned a lot. But reading the books that I showed you and many others opened my mind on everything: how to manage my team, how to manage a small team, the challenge of managing a large team, because at some point I was managing 600 people. So that's to me the best advice.
I love that. Read more books, read more business books, professional books to, continue the learning process. That's brilliant way.
Because you can have, and then one advice that I give, and that's what I do, whenever I feel stressed or whenever I have some downtime, then I close the computer, or I don't take my phone, go to the couch and read a book. Because you can still read literature or other books, but maybe that could be a nighttime reading. But during the day, you can read like a business book, which is like working. And people don't have, or they try to be steamrolled by the work, and they don't take enough time for themselves. Freeing space for cognitive thinking is absolutely the most important thing to do. And people don't realize that.
Super. Read more books. I just love that. It was a pleasure to have Giovanni. I learned a lot. So on all your behalf, I would like to thank you. Thank you, Giovanni, for joining our session today.
Thank you for having me here. Pleasure.
Did you like today's content? If yes, then don't forget to hit the like button. If you heard something interesting, then don't forget to share it with your network and friends. And last but not least, please support us on this journey to spread awareness on topics related to M&A and integration by subscribing to our channel. That's all for now. Stay healthy and see you next time.
And if you like this session, I'm sure you'll also like our latest new tool. It is a quick assessment scorecard to assess the robustness of your culture integration capabilities in M&A. It just takes less than 5 minutes to answer. It is for free and you get instantaneous assessment. So visit culturema.scoreapp.com, That's culturema.scoreapp.com and find out for yourself.
I hope you guys enjoyed the show today. This show was sponsored by Fifth Chrome, a business strategy advisor in a training company specializing in M&A, post-merger integration, and business strategy.